Welcome to the Carey Nieuwhof Leadership Podcast on YouTube. My name is Carey Nieuwhof, and my goal is to help you lead like never before. So what I do every week is I sit down with world-class leaders and church leaders, business leaders, and I talk to them about what made them who they are and try to have the conversation with them that you would have if you got to sit down for lunch with them or have dinner with them or really got to spend some time with them. So we go into the backstory and we explore what made them who they are and some of the principles they've learned along the way. So if you enjoy this episode, I would love for you to like it, to subscribe, and also to share it with your friends. And in the meantime, here's today's episode. Nir, welcome to the podcast. It's so good to have you on. I'd love to start actually with your first book. We're going to talk a lot about Indistractable, but you wrote a book that became very quickly the talk of Silicon Valley, and in many ways it still is. So can you give us why you wrote Hooked and what that book is all about?
Sure. So I'm what you call a behavioral designer. So I help companies build the kind of products and services that build healthy habits in people's lives. And the goal behind Hooked was to democratize these tactics that are used by the gaming companies and by social media companies to get people hooked to their products so that the rest of us can build the kind of products and services that help improve people's lives. And that's exactly what's happened over the past 5 years. Companies in the education space like Kahoot, the world's largest educational software, uses the Hook model to get kids hooked onto in-classroom learning. Fitbod uses the Hooked model to get people hooked to exercising in the gym. I've worked with people in the publishing industry to get people into the habit of reading a paper, like the New York Times is one of my former clients. In the healthcare space, getting people to get a habit of taking their medication or using a particular medical device. I even profile in the book the Bible app is an app
version. Right.
Yeah, exactly. YouVersion is an example of a product that uses the Hook model to get people into the habit of engaging with Scripture. So I really do believe that we can use these amazing technologies, not just for video games and social media. We can use them to build wonderful, healthy habits in people's lives.
And in some respect, then, your work parallels to some degree stuff that James Clear or Charles Duhigg has done, like how do you perform a habit, but it really lit up the tech world because also Instagram, Facebook, all the apps, Snapchat, TikTok, I'm sure is probably one of the most latest incarnations of apps that really have figured out and companies that have really figured out how to get us hooked. Can you walk us through the sequence of like the neural programming that happens that creates a habit for better or for worse?
Yeah, so Hooked is really about how to do this through products. And there's there's quite a few differences between building a habit for yourself and designing a product or service to help people form a habit. So if you take YouVersion, for example, if you talk about the Bible app, it's one of these apps that I think is very habit forming, but very few people give it enough credit. We think of TikTok and Facebook and Instagram, but we don't realize how many products can be used to help people form healthy habits in their lives. And of course, this is all a matter of opinion, right? If your values don't include engaging with Scripture, well, then you think it's a frivolous thing for people to engage with the Bible. And I would argue I hear the same exact sentiment from people who think that Facebook and TikTok is a frivolity. Right. It's really about your values and what you want to spend your time on earth doing. But if we use these products correctly and we design them appropriately, they can actually help people do more of what they want to do, whether that's going to the gym or eating healthier or engaging with Scripture or engaging with loved ones. We can do this facilitated through technology. So the way the Hooked model works is this. So it starts off with a trigger. A trigger comes in two forms. We have an external trigger and an internal trigger. An external trigger is some kind of ping, ding, ring, or thing in your environment that prompts you to action. Now, there's another type of trigger called an internal trigger, which we're going to get back to later. So if you use, for example, Facebook or the Bible app, the external trigger is pretty obvious. It's a notification on your phone. Now, the action phase of the Hook is defined as the simplest behavior done in anticipation of a reward. So on Facebook, for example, it's opening the app and scrolling the feed. With the Bible app, it's opening the app, reading the Scripture. Then comes the variable reward phase. And the variable reward phase comes from the psychology of B.F. Skinner. And this is something that you don't find, I think, in James Clear or Charles Duhigg books around personal behavior change. Mm-hmm. This is about where a product would engage a person through variable rewards. Now, variable rewards comes from the classic work of B.F. Skinner, the father of operant conditioning. He found that when a reward was given on a variable schedule of reinforcement, when there's some kind of uncertainty there, the classic experiment, he had these pigeons that he put inside a little box, and he let these pigeons peck at a disc. And every time the pigeon pecked at the disc, they would receive a little reward. And at first, he could train these pigeons to peck at the disc, and this is called operant conditioning. You've probably done this with your puppy, right? That you get them to do a trick, you give them a treat. Well, one day he ran out of these food pellets. He didn't have enough of these little rewards, and so he couldn't afford to give it to the pigeon every time. He could only give it to the pigeon once in a while. So sometimes the pigeon would peck at the disc, no treat, no reward. The next time the pigeon would peck at the disc, they would receive a reward. And what Skinner observed was that the rate of response, the number of times these pigeons pecked at the disc, increased when the reward was given on a variable schedule of reinforcement. And so in all sorts of things that we find most engaging, most captivating, most habit-forming, you always find an element of variability. Why do you think people love watching spectator sports, right?
Because you don't know how it's going to end, right?
You don't know how that ball or the puck, you don't know where it's going to go. It's variable. There's uncertainty. A game isn't that much fun when you know who won the match, right? If you record it and somebody told you who wins, it's not as much fun, right? There's uncertainty there. What makes a book fun to read? What makes a movie fun to watch? What makes romance romantic? What makes a slot machine something that people like to engage with? Uncertainty, variability. And so when we use a product online, like Facebook, for example, that's scrolling and searching for whatever it is you're looking at. Some of it is interesting, some of it is mundane. That variability is the reward that is really the fuel of these hooks. Then finally, the last step of the hook model is the investment phase. The investment phase, and this is something you don't see when it comes to traditional, personal behavior change, like you talked about the other books that help people change their own habits. This is specific to product design, is that when the user puts something into the product that improves it with use, this creates what we call stored value. Stored value means that the product gets better and better the more it is used, which is revolutionary in the history of manufacturing. So when you think about when Henry Ford is credited with saying you can have any color of Model T as long as it's black.
Yeah.
Why did he say that? Because it was really hard for him to retool his factory just because one customer wanted their car red, another wanted a purple car. That was really hard to do. Well, today, we can make individual versions of our product for each and every customer. Because when you give a company data, content, followers, reputation, any of these things store value. So as opposed to physical goods, right? If you think about everything in the physical world, depreciates. It loses value with wear and tear. Habit-forming products do the opposite. They appreciate. They get better and better the more you use them. The more data, the more content, the more interaction, the more skill, the more reputation you build in one of these platforms, you are customizing the service to an audience of one. And it actually wouldn't be that interesting. If you logged into my Pinterest account, my Facebook account, my YouVersion account, it wouldn't be that interesting because it's been tailored to me based on the data I've given these companies. And it's through successive cycles, through these 4 steps, trigger, action, reward, investment, that habits are formed, that tastes are shaped until, and this is what I talked about earlier, I would get back to, the internal trigger forms an association with the product's use. And this is where the habit takes over. So unlike a product that has to be triggered with an external trigger, right, that always requires a ping, a ding, a ring, some spammy advertising, some annoying messaging, eventually a habit-forming product doesn't need that stuff. A habit-forming product is one where it has attached its use to an internal trigger, not an external trigger, not a ping or ding, but something that is going on inside the user.
That you want to do it.
What is a little bit of a flip side? It's because you feel a discomfort not doing it.
Okay.
That an internal trigger is an uncomfortable emotional state that we seek to escape from. So when I'm lonely, check Facebook. When I'm uncertain, I Google. When I'm bored, well, there's limitless options, right? I check the news. I check stock prices, sports scores, Pinterest, Reddit, lots of products and services to ease this uncomfortable sensation of boredom. So the ultimate goal of a habit-forming product, whether it's enterprise, consumer web, doesn't matter, online, offline, is to connect the product's use to one of these internal triggers, to an uncomfortable emotional state that you get relief from using that product or service.
Okay, this is fascinating because, I think I've thought about that a lot. You look at Instagram. Mm-hmm. And most of us have Instagram, but you're right. Your Instagram looks very different than mine. Mine looks very different from yours. Not just the number of people that we follow, a number of followers, but like all the people who would scroll up. Like the algorithm determines what I see based on my past input, which I think you could argue somehow makes it better and sometimes makes it a bit worse. It's like I'd like a little more variety.
And primarily, you've chosen, right, the people that you want to follow. So your feed is going to be customized based on what you've decided was interesting for you.
But even Instagram now decides what I see among the people who follow. It's like, oh, you really like this one, so I'm going to give you more of that one.
It gives you suggestions, right? Where you can say, okay, if you like this one, maybe you want to follow another person.
So I'm thinking about the different leaders who are listening, and a lot of us have very predictable products and very predictable services. Are we missing something there with the, the randomness? What do you call it? The variable reward? How do you see that play out as a strategy for leaders?
Well, it's not about, sometimes folks read my book Hooked and they misinterpret it as saying, oh, this is gamification, right? Add points, add badges, add leaderboards, add coupons, and you're going to make it variable. And that's not at all what I'm saying. In fact, most of the time gamification falls on its face because anytime you have a reward, the purpose of the reward is to scratch the user's itch. So actually, we start at the end. Remember, I talked about those internal triggers. That's actually where we start. We start by understanding what is the user's itch. What is the internal trigger on a psychological basis, not just on a functional basis. A lot of times when I, in my consulting practice, I'll talk to a client and I'll say, okay, what's the internal trigger here? What does the product do for the customer? What's the customer's itch? And they'll get down to, brass tacks of functionality. Oh, we have this, technology that does this and that. No. I want to know on a psychological level, what is the internal trigger? Is it uncertainty, anxiety, fatigue, fear, loneliness? What is the feeling that we are going to make better? And so that's what we have to start with. Once we understand the internal trigger, then we can build the variable reward to scratch that itch and yet leave the user wanting more. So if the internal trigger, I see this a lot with enterprise products, SaaS products, where you sell into an enterprise, and what the customer really wants is that what they feel, what the internal trigger is, uncertainty, anxiety, fear, and so the variable reward has to give them certainty around what to do next, right? That's the purpose of the variable reward. But many times I see people lobbing on gamification, points, badges, and leaderboards. That's super annoying if that doesn't solve my problem, right? If I'm bored, gamification is great. Now I want to be entertained. But if I'm fearful, anxious, and uncertain, I don't want gamification. I want certainty. So
okay, I get it.
We have to make sure that the variable reward scratches the itch of the internal trigger every time.
So can you give us a very specific example, say on an app we would know, whether that's the Bible app or Instagram or Facebook or something like that, how that principle is applied well?
Sure. Take your pick. So let's say, with Facebook, if the internal trigger is primarily loneliness, it's seeking connection. It's this base human need to understand others and to be understood ourselves. Well, that's the internal trigger. You do that many times a day, whether it's on, pick your social network of choice. You do that many times a day. The action is to just simply open the app. The variable reward is the uncertainty around what you might find in that feed, right? What's going on with your friends? Did they post interesting photos? What do the comments say? How many likes does something get? All of these variable rewards in a product like a social network like Facebook or Instagram. I would actually go back to good old email. I think email is the mother of habit-forming technology, right? Email is full of variable rewards. What does the email say? Is it spam or is it something important from work? Is it urgent? Is it not urgent? Is it good news? Is it bad news? All this variability is why we keep checking these emails. Many times when we don't even have an external trigger, we're cueing ourselves. Whenever we're uncertain about what to do at work or what might be going on or bored, the impulse is to take out our phone and check email, God knows how many times a day.
Okay, so you got tens of thousands of leaders listening right now. Some of them lead churches. Some of them lead businesses. They're like, Nir, I've got the guy who revolutionized Silicon Valley on the line. How on earth do I use this in my company? How do I use this in my church? Like break it down for us. If they ask you that question, how would you answer it?
Well, we want to find what the habit is. So if you're building a product, then the question is, what's the habit that you want to create through that technology? So you just follow these 4 basic steps of asking yourself these questions of what is the internal trigger, right? What's the psychological itch that you seek to scratch? What's the external trigger that prompts the user to action? The action phase, the key question is what's the key behavior and how can it be made simpler? The variable reward phase is, are we scratching the user's itch and yet leaving them wanting more? And then finally, the investment phase is the user putting something into the product in anticipation of a future reward. Is it something that makes the product better with use? And when you ask yourself these 5 fundamental questions, you can figure out, if you're building a new product, you can figure out what that product should look like, what the user experience should be. And if you have an existing product in market, then you can figure out where the leaks are, where the product is not engaging enough by using this as a diagnostic tool, because this same pattern is repeated in all kinds of products, enterprise, consumer web, online, offline. We see the same pattern repeated again and again. Now, I will say, not every product has to be habit forming, okay? Many products don't need a habit, right? If you're selling car insurance, you don't use car insurance habitually. There's no need to form a habit. Now, the problem is, if you don't build a habit, you better have some kind of other competitive advantage, whether that's intellectual property, economies of scale, a brand, something to create that competitive moat. Because if you don't, you're going to be fighting on price and features all day long, right? So Geico says, 15 minutes will save you 15%. And then the general comes out and says, oh, yeah, well, we'll save you 17% in 10 minutes. And so you're constantly fighting on price and features, which, of course, diminishes margins. And so you better have some kind of competitive advantage. Habits help you establish that competitive advantage. So think about Google, for example, right? When was the last time you sat down and you said, I wonder who makes the best search engine? Is it DuckDuckGo? Is it Bing? Is it, who makes the best search engine? No, you don't do that. And so this is the amazing power of a habit, because once the consumer has a habit in their mind, they just do it with little or no conscious thought. They don't even consider their options. They don't even look at what the competition might have to offer. Bing, the number 2 search engine, is so desperate to get you to search with them that they will literally pay you money to get you to search with them, and nobody does it.
And nobody does. Yeah.
No, we don't remember to. And in fact, people say, oh, yeah, but Google is so much better. That's why I use it. No, you're backwards rationalizing. Because what studies find is that when you compare the search results from Google to Bing and you strip out the branding, they've done these third-party analyses, people can't tell the difference. It's a 50-50 preference split, and yet Google owns, 90% of the search engine market because of one reason: habit. They don't have a better product. It's simply because of a habit.
So you've touched on something. I just want to case study this with you for a second, because I think it applies both to church and business leaders. One of the things I do is I send out an almost daily email to over 50,000, almost 60,000 leaders. And I did that when Facebook changed the algorithm. Facebook drove a lot of traffic to my site. Then Zuckerberg changed things overnight, and you can just watch it fall off a cliff. And I thought, well, I really want to connect with people. I'm going to try email. So I started emailing on a more regular basis. And I was terrified of unsubscribes. So what I found is the list has doubled in size. It's got a huge open rate. And when you were going through the characteristics of getting hooked on something, it's like, I try to help people. I give them a daily leadership tip. There's usually a link to something else I've written. So when I'm thinking about businesses, I look at a lot of newsletters I read or emails I read and letters or emails I don't. And the ones I don't read are predictable. And so can you kind of just comment on that and talk about some things we can do? Because I think email is one of the most underappreciated strategies available to business leaders these days that most people miss. Tell me what you think about that. I'd love to pick your brain on that.
For many products, I talk to many business leaders who have a product that itself will not be habit forming. And the biggest reason a product will not be habit forming is because of the frequency of use. So it's only these kind of products that are used at least within a week's time or less that could ever have a chance of forming a habit. And of course, the more you use a product, the more likely it is to become a habit. So if we know that the average smartphone user checks their home screen 150 times a day, that means the habit forming potential of these technologies is very, very high because the frequency of use is so high. But what if your product is not used every day, right? What if it's a product that's rarely used? Like, we talked about car insurance earlier. Well, then what do? What you have to do is to bolt on a habit-forming experience, okay? How do you do that? You use what we call the 2 C's. The 2 C's stand for content and community. That if you can build a habit around something that occurs much more frequently than the purchase, that is a way that you can bolt on a habit-forming product. So let me give you 2 examples. When it comes to community, for example, content. Let's do content first. So do you know Williams-Sonoma? Do you have that in Canada? Yeah. Okay, you have it there too, right? Okay, so Williams-Sonoma, they sell cookware, right? Pots, pans, coffee makers, these things that you just do not buy every week. It will never be a habit. So what did they do? They started a website called Taste. Taste.com has been rated one of the best cooking-related websites on the web. And every day, twice a day, they publish interesting content. Interviews with chefs, recipes, all kinds of interesting content. So like you, they have created this content consumption habit where people will type in taste.com just like they'll type in New York Times or CNN or Fox News because they want to see what interesting content taste.com has posted. And of course, they send it over email as well. And the variable reward is what is in that content, right? That becomes the habit.
Brilliant.
And so in this case, the mantra I want folks to remember is that monetization is a result of engagement, not the other way around. Monetization is a result of engagement. If you can keep people engaging, of course, when it is time to buy some cookware, where am I going to go?
You're going to think Williams-Sonoma. 100%.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. The other example is Hallmark Keepsake Ornament Club. Now, the Hallmark Keepsake Ornament Club turns out are you a member by chance?
I'm not, but
No.
I think I have friends who would be. Yeah.
Okay, so 300,000 Americans are members of this club, 300,000 Americans, and talk about a product that is not bought with sufficient frequency to form a habit. People do not buy Christmas ornaments every week.
Yeah, no kidding.
Right? 300,000 Americans are members of this club. Why? Because of a community habit. You can go to Hallmark stores across the country in the middle of the summer, in July, and you will see a line at the door. Why? Because they are giving people the facility to form community. People are desperate to interact with each other. And this is particularly pertinent to church leaders. People are desperate to connect with other people. And so this Hallmark Keepsake Ornament Club is the rationale for people to get together throughout the year. Check this out. If you're a member of the Hallmark Keepsake Ornament Club, one of the privileges is that when a new shipment of Christmas ornaments comes in the middle of summer, you're invited to help unpack them and stock the shelves. I know, right?
That's brilliant.
This is the incentive. Why? Well, because Bruce is going to be there and Marjorie's going to be there and my friends that I've been interacting with throughout the year are going to be there. So the product is the Christmas ornaments, but the service, why people keep coming back is for the interaction with their community. And so these are the 2 C's that we can bolt on to a product that's not used with sufficient frequency to be a habit itself.
That's absolutely huge. And I think that's one of those things where people might just stop right now, go replay the last 5 minutes and go, I could work on this for 2 or 3 months until I figure out a new strategy. This is really good. So you wrote the book that kind of got us all hooked on our phones, or at least contributed to that. They were on their way.
Not to the bad stuff. Not to the bad stuff. Remember,
just the good stuff. The Bible app. You got us addicted to the Bible app.
Right, exactly. That Facebook and the gaming companies knew these techniques years and years before. My goal was to democratize these techniques. Facebook didn't need to read my book. They already know these tactics. Gotcha. The gaming companies already knew them. What I wanted to do is to expand the use of these products so that everyone listening can use these techniques as well.
And your book's had a huge impact. And now your new book, Indistractable, is like, okay, so we're all glued to our phones. We got a million things coming at us. And tell me why you wrote Indistractable, because it's a really interesting 1-2 punch, right?
Yeah. So for me, it was really about this problem that I had myself, that I found that I was distracted a few years ago. I remember there's this one particular instance with my daughter that really made me reassess my relationship with distraction. We had this afternoon planned where we just had this beautiful daddy-daughter afternoon. And I remember we had this activity book of things that daddies and daughters could do together. And in this activity book, there was this one exercise of asking each other this question. If you could have any superpower, what superpower would you want? And I remember the question verbatim, but I can't tell you what my daughter said, because in that moment, I decided that it was a good time to be on my device, and my daughter got the message that whatever was on my phone was more important than she was.
Yeah.
And by the time I
We've
looked
all
up,
been there.
yeah, she left the room. She decided, okay, Daddy, I'll go play with a toy outside. And that's when I realized that I really had to reassess my relationship with distraction, because it wasn't just with my daughter. It was, I would sit down at my desk to write, to get some work done, and yet I'd end up, on Google or checking email or I don't know what else, and I wasn't able to do the work I wanted to do. I would say I was going to exercise and I didn't. I would say I was going to eat right and I wouldn't. And I decided, if I could have any superpower, I would just want the power to live with personal integrity. What if you just did what you said you would do? What would your life be like? Because, I wish I had the excuse that maybe our parents or grandparents had of, well, I didn't know what to do, right? I don't know how to lose weight, right? I don't know how to be better at my job. I don't know how to have better relationships. Fortunately, we don't have that problem anymore. If you don't know how to do something, just Google it. It's all out there.
100%. Yeah.
Who doesn't know how to do these things? Google it. It's there. So the problem is no longer that we have an information gap. The problem is no longer that we can have this excuse and say, well, I didn't know. The problem is that we keep getting distracted from doing the stuff we know we want to do. And so that's the superpower I wanted to develop. So the first step was I read every book on the topic. I initially thought, oh my goodness, it's the technology that's doing it to me, right? The technology's hijacking my brain. I bought every book on the topic that I could possibly find, and they all basically said the same thing. Technology is causing this problem. Stop using technology. Written by a professor who doesn't have a social media account.
Fair enough.
Give me a break. I mean, if I stopped using email, if I stopped using social media, I wouldn't be in business anymore, right? Like, how can I? It's so elitist to say just stop using these technologies.
Well, and sometimes in the Christian world, they're written by monks who live in the desert, so to speak, right? It's like I have a job. I'm not, what do I do?
Exactly. And frankly, we've been through this before. So I used to be clinically obese. And I remember when I was trying to diet desperately, I would buy these books that told me how to do these, 30-day plans, 30 days, no junk food, 30-day detoxes, 30-day this. And of course, what happens on day 31? You make up for lost time, right?
It's like, here comes the chips. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. Because you hadn't figured out why you do things against your better interest. Why do you get distracted? And so the same thing is going on with our technology. We have this tech boogeyman that we love to blame, that we say is hijacking our brains. It's addicting us. And in fact, it's not true. That this problem is much, much older than people realize. Distraction didn't start with the iPhone and with Facebook. Give me a break. Do we really think if Zuckerberg tomorrow said, you know what? I'm sick of this. The world's breathing down my neck. I'm done, right? I have enough money. I'm shutting off Facebook. Do we really think we're going to start reading Shakespeare and Chaucer in our spare time? No, we'll go back to exactly the same things we've always done. We'll get distracted one way or another. In fact, Plato talked about this problem 2,500 years ago. He called it akrasia, the tendency that we have to do things against our better interest. 2,500 years before the iPhone, and every successive generation has this moral crisis, that the latest technology is causing these problems, and it never, ever is. We had this conversation about the radio, the television, the comic book. All of these things they use the same exact language to blame. And the reason we do this is because we don't want to get to the root cause of why we get distracted in the first place.
I want to go there because I think you're absolutely right. Every generation has this challenge. In my last book, I wrote about, it's not necessarily a technological thing. A lot of us grew up with the dad who was always in the garage because he didn't want to talk to the kids, and the mom who was distracted, right? It was a 68 Camaro that took dad away. And now it might be gaming or it might be his phone or something. But you raised early in the book, you said something really interesting. First of all, you quoted, and I want to use this in the future, I think it's Paul Virilio, if I've got his name right, a philosopher who said, when you invent the ship, you also invent the shipwreck. I thought that was brilliant. Yeah, here we are. We kind of have the shipwreck. But Yuval Harari said the greatest threat, this was in a TED interview he did last year, today is what he calls human hacking, the ability of tech to hijack our ability to think for ourselves. And then you argue at the beginning of Indistractable that there'll be two kinds of people who let their attention and lives be controlled. There'll be two kinds of people. People who let their attention be controlled by others, and then people who will call themselves indistractable. I want to talk about what's actually at stake. Other people have said focus is a new superpower, which I tend to agree with. But do you think it's as dire as Yuval Harari says it might be, or that really like people who are distractible are really going to be at a huge competitive disadvantage in the future? I'd love to unpack that.
So I don't agree with Harari's assessment. I think he makes it sound as if this is an inescapable thing. I think that if you are aware of what is going on and you have tactics to do something about it, I mean, that's what Indistractable is all about. Yeah. You can be indistractable. So I think, Harari's diagnosis, I know that Harari has one time said that in the future, technology will know you better than your mother.
Right.
And that's supposed to be very scary. That, if technology knows you better than your mother, then it can get you to do things like your mother used to do when you were a child. And that's a very scary image. And a lot of tech critics use this very inflammatory language because, let's face it, it gets a lot of clicks. Mm-hmm. But then, of course, my first thought was, wait a minute. Don't most people rebel against their parents? I remember my mother telling me to do all kinds of things that I was not going to do because she told me to do them.
Right.
And this is what's happening right now. We are waking up to the fact that as good as these technologies are, as amazing as their algorithms might be, we can hack back. Who doesn't know that these devices are designed to hack our attention? I use the word hack in terms of computer hackers.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
To hack means to gain unauthorized access to something, right? And so any form of media, whether it's Fox News or CNN or the New York Times or Facebook or any form of media, their job is to capitalize and monetize your eyeballs because they sell them to advertisers. Does anybody not know that?
Yeah.
Does anybody not know that this is the way media companies make money? They sell advertising. Good morning. Right. Yes, This is what they do. But that doesn't mean we can't hack back. And the way we hack back is to understand how they do this, realize that they have a big Achilles heel inside every one of their business models, which is that, guess what? We have a choice. We can do something about these media companies, whatever form they take, or any other distraction for that matter. You mentioned, whether dad was escaping into the garage with the Camaro or worse, right? Whether it's too much booze, too much news, too much whatever, it's all for the same reason, which we talked about earlier, these internal triggers. That what we have to start realizing is that we need to face the fact that the reason we get distracted, the reason we go off track, is an inability to cope with discomfort in a healthier manner. That's all it is.
Is that under the idea that time management is pain management, which I thought was really, and I never heard it expressed that way. Can you explain that and unpack that, Nir?
Sure. So, when we think about this deeper question that Plato posed 2,500 years ago of why do we do things against our better interest? By the way, we find this in Scripture as well about, throughout the New and Old Testament, this struggle with distraction, this struggle with not doing what we say we're going to do. It's certainly not a new problem. We have to ask ourselves on a deeper level, first principles, why do we do anything? Not just why do we do things against our best interest, why do we do anything and everything? And most people will tell you that the seat of human motivation is about carrots and sticks. It's about the pursuit of pleasure and the avoidance of pain. Freud calls this the pleasure principle. Neurologically, it's not true. Not true. We do not do things in the pursuit of pleasure and the avoidance of pain. That's an abstraction. In fact, neurologically, everything you do for one reason, and that is the desire to escape discomfort. Even the pursuit of pleasurable sensations, wanting, craving, desire, lusting. The reason we say love hurts is because neurologically that is exactly what is going on. Craving something, feeling good is itself, that desire, psychologically destabilizing. So everything we do is about a desire to escape discomfort. If you think about it, think about biologically, right? So if you feel cold, the brain says, "Ooh, this is uncomfortable. You should put on a coat." If you feel hungry, your brain says, "Oh, those hunger pangs don't feel good." You eat. If you eat too much, the brain says, "Oh, that's not comfortable." Now you feel stuffed. You stop eating. So those are physiological sensations. And of course, the same holds true for our psychological sensations, right? We talked about earlier how when you're lonely, you check Facebook. When you're bored, you check Reddit, the news, stock prices, all of these things we do to satiate these uncomfortable internal triggers. So this means, therefore, that if all human behavior is prompted by a desire to escape discomfort, that therefore means that time management is pain management. That if we don't have tactics ready to go for how to deal with discomfort, we will always succumb to one thing or another, whether it's overeating, over drinking, over consuming the news, whatever we waste our time and later regret, always comes down to the same common source. It's not a character dysfunction. It's simply an impulse control problem around how we do not know how to deal with discomfort so that it leads us to traction rather than distraction.
So in the time we have left together today, Nir, I'd love for you, and the book is hyper practical. Short chapters, very doable. You can work through it. It's not an easy read in the sense that there's a lot of application, but it's not a complicated read. Do you know what I mean? It's like, oh, this is what you do.
Yeah. I wanted to make, at the end of every chapter, there's actually a chapter summary. I read a lot of books, and I find that many books are written with the kind of language that's almost like the author doesn't want you to understand, because if you summarize the chapter, it actually would be a really simple concept that didn't need to be written over 30 pages. So at the end of every chapter, if you're the kind of person who likes to skim, no problem. You can go to that chapter summary at the end of the chapter and get all the goodies.
It's so good. We're baking that into my next book too. We're going to have chapter summaries at the end, because that's even good to look back on. And it's you're hyper practical. So I've loved that we've lived in the theoretical, because I think if you understand the presuppositions, the way you're motivated, it's good. But let's just assume most of us are distracted. So how do you give us some broad strokes into becoming indistractable?
Yeah, so just like there was 4 parts of the hook model, there's 4 parts to the Indistractable model. So let me just walk through those 4 real quick. The first step is to master the internal triggers. Okay, so that we have a strategy in place, many strategies in place, so that when we feel these uncomfortable emotional sensations, we know what to do with that discomfort. What a lot of people are told these days, unfortunately, by the self-help industry, is that feeling bad is bad. That feeling uncomfortable, you have to either medicate, you have a character flaw, you have to go see a psychiatrist, something's wrong with you if you're not happy all the time. And that's ridiculous. That is not true. We have discomfort for a very important reason. It helps us strive to do better. And so we can harness that discomfort, and so it leads us towards traction rather than distraction, if we know what to do with it. So it's the first section of the book is all about how do you master these internal triggers. The second section is about making time for traction, which is all about turning your values into time. And this is a critically important point. Out of the people I interviewed for this book over the past 5 years, it's amazing how every high performer, whether it's a business leader, an athlete, they all take their time very seriously. They plan their day. And I show you exactly how to do that, and how, more importantly, you probably heard about the importance of planning your time. But what about how to synchronize your time with the various stakeholders in your life? So how to synchronize it with your spouse, with your boss. It's a life-changing practice, and I tell you how to do that schedule syncing process. The third step is about hacking back the external triggers. And so this is where we go systematically through all of these external triggers in our life, from our phones to our computers to meetings. Oh my goodness, how much time do we spend in stupid, distracting meetings, to emails, to open floor plan offices. That actually turns out to be the greatest source of distraction in the modern American workplace. 80% of survey respondents said the number one source of distraction was other people interrupting them during their work. How do you hack back that? I tell you exactly how. The final step is to prevent distraction with pacts. And this is where we can use what's called a pre-commitment device as the fail-safe, as the firewall, to make sure that as a last resort, we don't get distracted. So it's really about those 4 key strategies. And then I give you lots and lots and lots of tactics in each one of those 4 strategy buckets.
Can we break that down just a little bit more and go back to the beginning? So I want to talk about motivation, and I think you're right, and congratulations on your weight loss. You look incredibly fit right now. But, that's something I can always lose 10 more pounds. And, my wife's pointed out to me, and so have a few friends, that a lot of eating is emotional, and you feel stressed or you feel sad. Is part of that just going, okay, why am I going to check Instagram right now? Why am I jumping on Reddit? Why? I was just in email 20 minutes ago. Why am I in it again? Is it like part of that just pausing and going, what am I doing? Like, can you unpack that a little bit more?
Sure. So the analog to food is very appropriate. So when I was clinically obese, I would love to have told you that it was big bad McDonald's and Frito-Lay doing it to me. It wasn't.
No.
It wasn't. It was because I ate when I was sad. I ate when I was feeling lonely. I ate when I was mad at myself for eating too much. That's why I overate. It was an emotion problem. It was not a character flaw or these big bad companies doing it to me. That's an excuse. It's not true. And it wasn't until I faced that fact and I frankly figured out what was going on in my life and did something about those problems. And for the problems I couldn't solve, I learned tactics to cope with that discomfort in a healthier manner. So there's a few things we can do. One of the things that we can do is to note the distraction. And so this is a very important step, very, very simple. Psychologists tell us that by simply noting that sensation, so in every copy of the book, there's what we call a distraction tracker. And you can print this out for yourself as well, where what we're doing is we're simply noting the distraction. We're writing it down on a piece of paper as soon as we can after the distraction. And by simply naming what that distraction was, that's the first step to getting control over it, getting agency over it. Then we have to realize there's only 3 things that cause any and every distraction, right? Every procrastination, it's all about this impulse control problem. And it's only 3 reasons for why that might happen. It's either an internal trigger, an external trigger, or a planning problem. That's it. There's only one of 3 reasons. And so the key here is not to never get distracted. I still get distracted from time to time, but here's the difference between someone who is indistractable and someone who is not indistractable. Before I wrote this book, I would get distracted by something, and then the next time I would get distracted by it again and again and again. Paulo Coelho has this great quote, and he said, "A mistake repeated more than once is a decision." I had made the decision by allowing the same mistake over and over again to allow myself to get distracted.
So I like that. Internal, external, or what was the third?
A planning problem.
A planning problem. Because I think that pretty much summarizes my life. It was like, oh yeah, I was bored, I was hungry, I was tired, I was sad. External, my phone buzzed, my phone rang, somebody knocked on the door. Or the third, which I keep forgetting. Sorry. But
planning problem.
Planning problem, right. I had no plan for the day, and I just kind of totally went into reactive mode.
Right.
I know we've only got a few minutes left, and I really appreciate the generosity with your time.
My pleasure. Thank you.
It's so practical, Nir, your book. Can you, I'm thinking you've got that picture of a guy's desktop. Do you remember that?
Yeah, sure.
Walk us through just some of the external stuff that we do. I have been an evangelist for turning all notifications off on your phone for years. You have hacks like that. Walk us through just a handful of really practical, guys, here's how you get rid of some of the external distractions.
Sure. So there's all kinds of tactics that you can use. And again, the tactics are less important than the strategy. Tactics are what you do, but strategy is why you do it. So it's not necessarily as important about, okay, use this notification feature or this software. There's lots of them, tons of them. I give you tons of resources. If you go to indistractable.com, you will get more tactics than you can ever apply in your entire life. But they're there for you, okay? But what's more important than tactics is the strategies. Understand those 4 crucial steps of master the internal triggers, make time for traction, hack back the external triggers, and prevent distraction with packs. Instead of the hacking back the external triggers piece, which I think is actually the easiest part, the turning off notifications, which, by the way, 2/3 of people with a smartphone never change their notification settings.
Wow.
Can we honestly say that technology is addicting us and hijacking our brains? We haven't even taken 5 minutes to turn off those. Please just do that for yourself.
Pretty simple to do, yeah.
Anybody can do it, and you don't have to do all this stuff all at once. The distractions that really get people are the ones that they don't realize are happening. For example, in the open floor plan office. Open floor plan offices save companies tons of money in real estate expenses, but they are a hotbed of distraction.
Yeah.
Number one cause of distraction, according to 80% of survey respondents. So I tell you how to deal with that. One of these simple solutions that you can download at indistractable.com, it actually is inside the book itself if you buy the physical copy, is what's called a screen sign. A screen sign is this piece of cardstock. You rip it out of the book, you fold it into thirds, and you put it on your computer monitor. And it tells your colleagues, if you work in an open floor plan office, it tells your colleague, it says bright red, it says, I'm indistractable, please come back later. Okay? Super simple, incredibly effective. And what's so great about this is that it starts spreading the message throughout the workplace. Okay? Because what I found in this book, only half the book is about stuff you can do for yourself. The other half of the book is about the other environments we operate in. A distraction is a problem of society. It's a culture problem. So there's a section on how to raise indistractable kids. I mean, this is the skill of the century. If you think the world is distracting now, just wait a few years. It's going to be more distracting for your kids. So it's absolutely imperative we teach them how to be indistractable. There's a section on how to have indistractable relationships. And then there's a section on how to build an indistractable workplace. And so when we take steps like this, and we show others that we are indistractable ourselves, whether it's in a corporate setting by using this screen sign, or, if you have kids, I hear this all the time about how parents complain about how their kids are so distracted, the video games, the social media, and meanwhile, they're shouting at their kids to get off Fortnite while they're checking email on their own phone. You can't do that. Kids are hypocrisy detection devices. They have little electrodes. They're constantly searching for when you're a hypocrite. And so you have to become indistractable yourself if you want your kids to know this skill set as well. And the same goes in the workplace, that by setting this example for others, this is how I think we're going to change the world so that all of us become indistractable. And if I can interject a quick anecdote, we've been here before. I talk about in the book how when I was a kid, I was born in the 70s, but I remember the 80s very clearly. And I remember in the early 80s, we had in our household ashtrays in our living room.
Oh, yeah.
Now, you remember this, right? So
I remember.
Anyone born after 1982, 1983, you're not going to know what we're talking about. This is going to seem absolutely crazy, but there was a time that people would walk into each other's homes and without asking, light up cigarettes. They would just do that. This was very common behavior.
People used to smoke at work. When I first started in my 20s, people would smoke in their offices. It's crazy.
Exactly. And so today, that would be unthinkable. You would never walk into someone's living room and just assume you could light up a cigarette. That'd be crazy. Can you imagine if someone came over to your house and did that? You'd kick them out.
I don't know what would happen. It would be, you'd drop dead, I think,
right?
Of shock.
So what happened, right? Was there a law that says you can't smoke in someone's private residence? No, you can do that. There's no law that says you can't do that. What changed is that people started sticking up and saying, no, I have an identity here. I am a non-smoker. My mom did this one day. She threw away the ashtrays. And when one of her friends came over and lit up a cigarette, she said, oh, I'm sorry. We are non-smokers. We don't smoke. If you'd like to smoke, if you'd be so kind to go outside. And at the time, this was so offensive. How dare you? This was so rude to ask someone to go outside to smoke. And of course, today, you wouldn't dream of someone coming over and just lighting a cigarette in your living room because we spread what's called social antibodies. We inoculated society to these antisocial, harmful behaviors. And that's exactly what we need to do now with distraction. By calling yourself indistractable, by being the kind of person who lives with personal integrity, who does what they say they're going to do, who decides for themselves, look, I am not going to let my time and attention and my life be controlled by others. I am going to decide for myself. By being indistractable, you send out ripples to the rest of the world, and hopefully the rest of the world will change as well.
Well, I got to tell you, the book really helped me, and your work has really helped me. Anything else you want to add? And then tell us where we can find you online, Nir.
Yeah, I appreciate it. So my website is nirandfar.com, but Nir is spelled like my first name. It's N-I-R and Far. And so there's all kinds of resources there. By the way, if you go to Nir and Far, there's an 80-page workbook that we couldn't fit into the final edition of the book, but it's there for you. It's complimentary to help you become indistractable. Cool. And if you do end up getting the book, make sure you keep the order number. Okay, very important. Keep the order number, whether you get on Amazon or your local bookstore, doesn't matter, or on Audible. Keep the order number. go to Indistractable.com, and there's a video course that's waiting for you. It's complimentary. As long as you enter in that order number to show you bought the book, you can get access to that free video course as well. And that's all at Indistractable. It's spelled I-N, the word distract, A-B-L-E, Indistractable.com.
Nir, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Well, I hope today's episode was helpful to you. You can always get more by subscribing to my channel. I also have a lot more content over at CareyNiewhof.com for leaders in business and leaders in churches. And you can get transcripts of this episode there and so much more, plus some other stuff I do for leaders. So head on over there to discover more at CareyNiewhof.com. And in the meantime, I really hope our time together today has helped you lead like never before.